Young slave comes home to find master's wife in his cabin. She says, "I missed you." The evening was heavy with humidity, the air thick and sticky against his skin as Elijah trudged along the narrow path that led from the fields to his cabin. Rain had threatened all afternoon, and now the sky was a low, bruised gray, pregnant with thunder. The distant rumble rolled over the plantation, vibrating through the earth and up into his chest. Sweat mixed with the residue of dust and toil, leaving his shirt clinging to his back. His hands were raw from hours of hauling, tying, repairing, everything the master demanded of him, everything that kept his life suspended on a fragile thread. Elijah's mind was elsewhere, haunted as always by the quiet moments he never allowed himself to savor, by the stolen glances of the mistress. Her name was Eleanor, though he never dared whisper it aloud. She moved through the grand house like a wraith, beautiful, lonely, elegant, her eyes always tracing shapes he could never reach. She was young, her skin pale as moonlight, her hair a golden brown that glinted in sunlight like copper. And yet, her gaze always seemed to linger, just slightly too long, when their paths crossed. The cabin door creaked open, startling him. He had not expected anyone, and certainly not Eleanor. She stood there, drenched from the rain, her dress clinging to her figure, hair plastered to her forehead and neck. A candle flickered in her hand, throwing shadows across her face. The familiar stern lines of her expression were softened, almost desperate. "I," Elijah began, uncertain, wiping the sweat and grime from his face. "I missed you," she said before he could speak, her voice low, trembling, yet laced with something that made his heart seize painfully. It was not a question, and yet it demanded a response. She stepped inside, and without hesitation, closed the door behind her. The click of the latch sounded far louder than it should have, echoing in the small cabin as though announcing a crime. Elijah's breath caught. Every instinct screamed at him to push her out, to remind her, and himself, of the danger. Yet, he found himself frozen, his hands falling limply to his sides. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, his voice low, steady but betraying the churn of emotions within. She advanced a step, her eyes wide, reflecting the candlelight. "I had to see you. I couldn't. I couldn't bear another night without it." She didn't explain, didn't justify, and yet the weight of her words filled the room, pressing against him like the humidity outside. Elijah swallowed, heart hammering against his ribs. His life was one of careful discipline, measured words, silent obedience. A misstep, a look, a whisper, any of these could be reported, punished, or worse. And yet, in that instant, he felt the allure of her nearness like a physical force, pulling at something deep within him that had lain dormant for too long. The first time their eyes had met had been accidental, or so it seemed. He had been carrying a tray of tea through the hall when she slipped, twisting her ankle in the ornate staircase. Instinct had driven him to catch her, to cradle her weight as she gasped in surprise, and the world had tilted on its axis. Every stolen glance afterward, every brief touch while passing through the house, had been a slow burn that neither could ignore. Now she stood before him, drenched and vulnerable, and yet somehow more commanding than she ever had behind the walls of her grand house. The candlelight played across the delicate curve of her neck, the sharp line of her jaw, the trembling of her lips. He wanted nothing, and everything, all at once. She moved closer, and he could feel the heat radiating from her soaked dress, the faint scent of lavender mixed with rainwater and sweat. "Elijah," she whispered, almost pleading, "I can't. I can't wait anymore." His hands twitched, reaching toward her, then falling back. "You mustn't. It, it's too dangerous," he said. Every muscle in his body screamed to obey, to pull her close, to touch and feel and risk it all. But reason pressed against desire like a cold hand on his chest. Eleanor's hand brushed against the edge of his arm, light as a feather, and he shivered. The contact, though fleeting, burned hotter than fire. "I don't care," she murmured. "I can't care. Not anymore. Not while he is away, while the house is empty. I—" Her words broke off into a sob, fragile and raw. and she buried her face against her hands. The sound tore through him. Elijah had learned long ago to master his emotions, to conceal every thought behind a stoic mask, but now all control slipped. He stepped forward, closing the distance, stopping just short of touching her. "If anyone sees," he began, and the threat hung between them, unspoken but understood. Her gaze lifted to meet his, wide and glistening, and the weight of it threatened to topple him. "I don't care if anyone sees," she whispered. And in that instant, Elijah knew the truth. They were both prisoners, bound by circumstance, by law, by the rigid and cruel structure of a world that forbade the desires that now consumed them. Thunder rolled overhead, shaking the cabin, and rain splattered against the roof like a drumbeat of urgency. Their hearts raced in tandem, echoing the storm outside. She stepped closer, until the air between them quivered, charged with longing and fear. His hand hovered, trembling, over her arm, and she leaned just enough to let him brush against her, testing the boundary between propriety and surrender. A sharp knock at the cabin door startled them both, and Elijah leapt back, heart pounding, eyes wide with alarm. Eleanor stiffened, her face pale, fear mingling with desire. The sound outside was unmistakable. Someone was approaching. Every second stretched, heavy with the risk of discovery. It's nothing," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. Her hand sought his, small and clammy, and he felt the desperate need radiating from her. Elijah shook his head, pressing a finger to his lips. "We must wait. They, they cannot know." And yet, even as he spoke the words of caution, he felt the magnetic pull between them, a force stronger than fear, than reason, than life itself. They were tethered together by something forbidden and fragile, a connection that could shatter in an instant if discovered. Yet one neither could deny. The storm raged outside, and inside, the room felt impossibly small, suffused with heat, rain, and the silent, unspoken promises lingering in the air. Eleanor's eyes met his once more, full of longing and fear, and Elijah knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him, that nothing would ever be the same. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing off the walls. And in that moment, the world contracted to just the two of them, hearts beating in desperate rhythm, caught between desire and peril, between the forbidden and the inevitable. Elijah's hand found hers, holding it just for a heartbeat, and the tiny contact was electric. Eleanor's breath hitched, and for a fleeting moment, everything else, the master, the overseer, the rules of the plantation, faded away. "Stay," she whispered, her lips nearly brushing his ear. "Please, just stay." And for the first time in his 19 years, Elijah allowed himself to hope. The knock had ceased, leaving only the hiss of rain against the cabin roof. The storm had grown heavier, pounding on the small wooden structure as if nature itself conspired to trap them in this fragile, suspended world. Elijah's chest heaved, his pulse still racing from the near discovery. He let go of Eleanor's hand reluctantly, stepping back, though the room felt impossibly empty without the warmth of her presence pressing against him. Eleanor remained near the center of the cabin, her soaked dress clinging to her legs, hair matted and dripping, candlelight dancing over her trembling features. She looked like a spirit drawn from some forbidden dream, as if she belonged neither to the world of the plantation nor to the harsh reality outside. I thought I heard someone," Elijah whispered, voice tight with tension. Every shadow in the small cabin seemed to twist into threat, every gust of wind sounding like a footstep. She shook her head, her hair falling into her eyes. It was only the wind, or the trees. Her voice wavered, but there was a defiance there, a dangerous edge that made Elijah ache with both fear and longing. She stepped closer, and the candlelight flickered across her pale skin. Elijah's hands itched to reach out again, to brush the rain from her face, to touch her hair, to feel the brush of her skin. Yet he resisted, knowing that each movement carried consequences he could scarcely imagine. The world they inhabited was merciless, and desire alone could destroy them both. "You should not have come here," he murmured, his gaze locked on hers. It is too dangerous for both of us. I know, she whispered, her lips parting slightly, as if to confess some truth she could not yet articulate. But I could not help myself. Every day, every hour, I feel. I feel something I cannot explain, something that makes this place unbearable when you are not near. Her voice cracked, and a single tear ran down her cheek, glinting in the candlelight. Elijah swallowed hard, the raw emotion in her tone stirring a longing so fierce it threatened to undo him. He wanted to gather her in his arms, to shield her from the cruel world, to let her know she was not alone in her isolation. But caution was a constant companion, a cold, relentless sentinel that would not allow him such a freedom. The storm intensified, and lightning flashed outside, illuminating the small cabin in harsh white light. For a fleeting second, Elijah saw every curve of her face, every detail of her vulnerability, as if the world had stripped away all barriers and left them exposed. Eleanor's gaze met his, and in that look, he saw both a plea and a command, an invitation to cross the boundary that society, law, and plantation rules had erected between them. Eleanor, he began, his voice low, trembling despite his best efforts at control. If we are seen, if anyone suspects, I do not know what would become of us. Her hands found his, small and delicate, gripping tightly. The touch was electric, sending shivers down his spine. I do not care, she whispered fiercely. I cannot care. Not anymore. Not while I live this lonely existence. The words struck him like a blow. He had always known she was unhappy, had suspected that her marriage was cold and loveless, that the house she inhabited was a gilded cage. Yet hearing her confess it in such raw terms, so openly, made his heart ache. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her that she was not alone, but the words caught in his throat, tangled with the dangerous truth that his very existence was bound to hers by secrecy, fear, and desire. Lightning struck again, closer this time, followed by a deafening clap of thunder that shook the cabin's walls. Eleanor flinched, and Elijah instinctively reached out, pulling her slightly closer, just enough to steady her without fully breaking the invisible barrier he had maintained. She leaned into his touch, and he could feel the warmth of her body, the faint scent of rain and lavender, the trembling of her breath against his hand. They stood in that precarious balance for what felt like an eternity, the storm outside a mirror of the tumult within. Neither dared to speak, for words could betray the dangerous proximity of their emotions. Instead, they communicated in glances, in subtle touches, in the way their breaths seemed to synchronize with the rhythm of the storm. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. Will you? Will you stay with me for a little while? Just, just until the storm passes. Her voice was tentative, almost pleading, and Elijah knew that this was a turning point. To agree would be to cross a line from which there was no return. To refuse would be to leave her alone in her despair. Elijah's mind raced, weighing the risks, the consequences, the danger of discovery. Yet when he looked at her, drenched and fragile, yet impossibly beautiful, the decision felt inevitable. I will, he said softly, stepping closer. The space between them seemed to collapse, charged with a tension that made his skin hum. They moved to sit on the edge of the small wooden cot in the cabin. Eleanor's dress clung to her legs, and Elijah's hands hovered uncertainly over her knees, torn between the urge to touch and the fear of transgression. She met his hesitation with a faint, almost imperceptible nod, a silent permission that made his pulse race. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and she leaned into his touch, eyes closing briefly. The contact was fleeting, yet it set their hearts ablaze. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the storm, the cabin, and the fragile, forbidden connection between them. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. Tell me you feel it too. Elijah's throat tightened. Every day, every glance, every accidental brush of hands had been a slow burn of longing and restraint. Now, with the storm raging around them, the cabin small and intimate, He could no longer deny the truth. "I do," he confessed, voice raw. "Every day, every hour. I cannot. I cannot stop thinking of you." A tear slipped down Eleanor's cheek, and she pressed her hand to his, holding it tightly. "Then we must be careful. We must not be seen, not by anyone. But I cannot resist you either." Their proximity was electric. Every brush of skin, every whispered word, every shared glance was a perilous dance. The boundaries of propriety, of ownership, of law, all seemed meaningless in that moment, yet the thread of discovery loomed like a shadow, constant and suffocating. Thunder rolled again, and lightning illuminated the cabin in stark white light, revealing the truth in their eyes. Desire, fear, longing, and the unspoken acknowledgement that their lives were forever intertwined. Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, and Elijah felt the tremor of her body against his own. It was a silent plea, a fragile moment of connection in a world that forbade it. He could feel her heartbeat against his chest, erratic and urgent, and he whispered, almost to himself, "We must be careful. But I am here, Eleanor. Always." She lifted her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and pressed her lips briefly to his hand. "I know," she murmured, "and that is enough for now." The storm outside began to subside, rain tapering to a steady patter against the cabin roof. The world had returned, slowly, around them, but the cocoon of intimacy they had shared remained. They had crossed the first threshold of their forbidden bond, and neither could retreat. Yet even in the quiet that followed, the fear lingered. Every shadow, every sound outside the cabin was a reminder of the danger they courted. Elijah's thoughts raced to the master, to the overseer, to the other slaves who might suspect, who might betray them. And still, he could not leave her side, could not resist the pull that had drawn them together in the first place. As the candle flickered, casting dancing shadows across the small cabin, Eleanor leaned against him again, and for the first time, Elijah allowed himself to imagine what it might be like if the world were not so cruel, if they could simply be together, unafraid, unhidden. But he knew that such dreams were dangerous, fragile, and perhaps impossible. For now, they had this moment, and it was enough to ignite a fire that neither storm nor plantation rules could extinguish. The sun had barely risen when Elijah slipped from the cabin, the dew clinging to his clothes and dampening the edges of his sleeves. The memory of Eleanor's trembling hands lingered, a weight he carried with him as he moved through the fields. He tried to concentrate on the labor, on the repetitive motions of lifting, hauling, and bending, but her gaze, so vulnerable yet commanding, haunted him. Eleanor, meanwhile, had returned to the grand house, her soaked dress replaced with a clean one, her hair carefully pinned to hide its dampness. She moved through the halls like a specter, quiet and distracted, careful not to draw attention from the housemaids or her husband, who remained distant, immersed in his accounts and business dealings. Even when he spoke, it was only in clipped, cold tones. He was a man who measured people like property, including her, and Eleanor had long ago learned that no affection would be found in his presence. Her thoughts, however, were consumed entirely by Elijah. That brief candlelit encounter in the cabin, the brush of his hand, the whisper of his voice, had left her breathless and aching. She wondered at the audacity, at the danger, at the small, forbidden fire they had ignited. She knew she should resist, that she should bury these feelings under the weight of propriety and fear. Yet each thought of him made her heart pound, made her pulse quicken with a longing she had never felt before. Elijah found himself restless even as he completed his tasks. The overseer's eyes followed him too closely, suspicion lurking in every glance. Every minor mistake could draw punishment, yet he could not focus. His mind was elsewhere, on Eleanor's whispered words, the weight of her hand in his, the vulnerability in her gaze. Each memory was both a comfort and a torment. That evening, when the household had quieted, and the master was away at an estate meeting miles distant, Eleanor found an opportunity. A storm had gathered again, black clouds rolling over the fields like a slow tide, and she knew this would provide both cover and excuse. She slipped from the house, cloak over her shoulders, and made her way to the small path leading to Elijah's cabin. Elijah was already outside, repairing a broken fence, the muscles in his arms flexing as he hammered wood into place. The rain began as a soft drizzle, turning the air thick with the scent of wet earth and green leaves. When Eleanor appeared through the trees, he froze, sweat and rain dripping from his brow, heart leaping at the sight of her. "You came," he said softly, dropping the hammer, though the work remained unfinished. "I had to," she replied, her voice low, almost urgent. She drew closer, and for a moment the rain made a soft, constant drumbeat around them, masking the sound of their footsteps. "I cannot stop thinking about you," she admitted, eyes wide and shimmering in the dim light. "It is unbearable, Elijah. I cannot endure another day without knowing you are near." His jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed caution. Every rule, every law, every unspoken threat of discovery pressed against him like a vice. "You risk everything coming here," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "If anyone sees, if the overseer suspects—" "I do not care," she interrupted, stepping closer. The rain plastered her hair to her face, yet she did not shy away from him. "I cannot care. I must see you. I must speak to you." They moved beneath the boughs of an ancient oak tree, its branches heavy with rain and shadow, providing a natural veil from the rest of the plantation. Here, alone, the world seemed smaller, the boundaries of owner and enslaved, mistress and servant, temporarily suspended. Elijah swallowed, torn between desire and duty. He had seen her vulnerability, had felt the raw emotion that pressed between them. But now he realized the depth of the risk. "I cannot not if someone comes," he said, lowering his voice further. "Do you understand? One glance from the wrong person, one word. It could ruin us both." She placed a hand against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm. "I know," she whispered, almost desperately, "but I cannot pretend it does not exist. It is here, in every glance, every thought, every breath. I cannot ignore it." The tension between them was palpable. Every step closer, every subtle brush of their hands, every heartbeat shared in silence, carried danger. Yet it was also intoxicating. The fear heightened their awareness of one another, made each movement, each glance, each whisper more potent, more urgent. A flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating her face in stark relief. Elijah saw every flicker of emotion, every fear, every longing. He reached for her hand, holding it carefully, as if the slightest pressure could unravel the fragile balance between passion and peril. "You must promise me," he said, voice trembling, "that you will be careful, that you will not be seen." "I promise," she replied, though her eyes conveyed that the promise was more a hope than a guarantee. "But you must also promise me. You will not deny me. Not now, not ever." The rain began in earnest, soaking them both, but neither moved to escape its wet embrace. It was as though the storm itself had become a confederate in their secret, shielding them, isolating them from the rest of the world. Lightning cracked again, illuminating the wet leaves and their intertwined hands, and Elijah felt the pull of desire he had tried to contain for so long. Eleanor shivered, partly from cold, partly from anticipation. "Let me stay," she murmured. "Just for a moment. Just until the rain passes." He nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken plea. They retreated beneath the oak, the leaves above providing scant cover from the deluge, and there they stood, close enough that their bodies brushed, careful yet daring in the space between them. Elijah could feel the warmth of her skin, the tremble of her breath, the delicate curve of her neck just within reach. Their conversation dwindled to whispers, each word charged with emotion. They spoke of nothing and everything, of loneliness, of duty, of fleeting dreams of freedom, of the unbearable ache of being near yet apart. Every glance, every hesitation, every fleeting touch carried the weight of the forbidden. Suddenly, a branch snapped nearby, sending both of them flinching. The reminder of the ever-present risk of discovery made their hearts pound violently. Eleanor pressed closer, unconsciously seeking the safety of his body, and Elijah wrapped an arm around her shoulders, careful yet protective. "Do you ever wonder," she whispered, "what it would be like if we could leave? If we could escape this life, this plantation, and just be together?" Elijah's jaw tightened. He had dreamed it, dared to imagine it in the quietest corners of his mind. But reality pressed against him, heavy and unyielding. "I think of it," he admitted, "every day. But the world outside is not kind, and our lives, they are not our own." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a long moment, neither spoke, listening to the rain, to the storm, to the muted world beyond the trees. In that silence, they shared something neither could name: trust, desire, fear, hope, all mingled together in the dangerous intimacy of the moment. Lightning flashed once more, illuminating their faces in stark contrast, and thunder rolled so close it seemed to shake the very earth beneath them. They clung to each other, more for solace than for warmth, and in that embrace, the world outside, the master, the overseer, the rules, the fear, fell away. Yet, even in the midst of their closeness, the reality of their situation pressed upon them like a cold weight. Every stolen meeting, every whispered word, every fleeting touch was a gamble, a risk that could destroy everything in an instant. And still, they could not resist. Finally, the storm began to abate, tapering to a steady drizzle, and the sky lightened to a dull gray. They remained beneath the oak, reluctant to leave, aware that each step back toward the plantation house could separate them again. Elijah released her gently, brushing the rain from her hair. "You must return," he said softly, voice heavy with longing, "before someone sees, before it becomes impossible." Eleanor nodded, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I will," she whispered, "but I will return, as long as the storm allows, as long as the world does not catch us." They parted then, each stepping back into the separate roles their lives demanded. Yet the bond forged beneath the storm, amidst the rain and shadow, remained unbroken, a fragile thread of hope, longing, and forbidden love stretching across the perilous distance that divided them. Elijah watched her go, heart hammering, knowing that each secret meeting carried them closer to both desire and danger, closer to a moment that could change everything, or destroy them entirely. The days that followed were a torment of longing and anticipation. Elijah moved through the plantation with a weight pressing on his chest, each glance toward the house a reminder of Eleanor's absence. She haunted his every thought, her voice, soft and trembling, her eyes, luminous with emotion, the memory of her hand in his, warm and fragile. Work became a mechanical blur, the hammer and plow moving beneath his hands while his mind wandered to candlelight, rain-soaked oaks, and whispered confessions. Eleanor, too, was restless. Her husband remained cold, absorbed in his ledgers, distant as ever, and the household staff were watchful, their eyes and ears everywhere. She found herself inventing excuses, lingering near windows, lingering near hallways, waiting for a moment when she could slip away unnoticed. Every step toward Elijah was a gamble, every heartbeat a rebellion against the life she had been assigned. It was a night thick with humidity and a slow, rolling thunder that began in the west and crept over the plantation, that their next meeting occurred. Elijah had repaired the fence by the small pond, where the willows leaned toward the water like silent sentinels. He had hoped to finish before dark, but the storm came early, heavy and insistent, forcing him to retreat beneath the gnarled branches of a willow. The soft patter of rain on leaves was almost soothing, though the looming clouds warned of the tempest to come. He barely had time to secure his tools when Eleanor appeared through the shadows, cloak over her shoulders, the hood falling back to reveal wet strands of hair clinging to her face. The rain had begun in earnest, cold and steady, soaking the ground beneath their feet. Her presence made Elijah's chest constrict, desire and fear warring violently within him. "Elijah," she breathed, her voice trembling yet urgent. I could not stay away. Not tonight. His heart raced. Eleanor, if anyone sees, he began, but she silenced him with a raised hand, her eyes glinting with fierce determination. I do not care, she whispered. Not tonight. Tonight, I must be near you. Just for a moment. The words sent a shiver through him, a mixture of longing and dread. They moved closer, beneath the shelter of the willow, the branches shielding them from the storm, yet leaving them vulnerable to the world beyond. Lightning illuminated the sky, stark and bright, revealing the contours of her face, the wet strands of hair plastered to her forehead, the desperate longing in her gaze. Elijah reached for her, tentative, his fingers brushing against her damp cheek. She leaned into his touch, eyes closing briefly, and in that fleeting contact, the storm around them seemed to fade. The world outside, the overseer, the master, the rules, ceased to exist. I cannot stop thinking of you, he admitted, voice low, almost lost beneath the rain's steady percussion. Every day, every moment, it is you. Her lips parted slightly, and she pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. I feel the same, she whispered, voice trembling. It is unbearable. Elijah, I cannot endure another day without this. Without you. Their hands met fully, fingers entwining, and the tension that had restrained them for so long ignited. They stood close, breathing in the storm, the rain, the danger, and the electricity between them. Every glance, every whispered word, every subtle touch carried the weight of forbidden desire and the constant fear of discovery. A flash of lightning illuminated the pond, casting ripples of white across the water. Eleanor's eyes shone, reflecting both the storm and her longing. Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we could leave? If we could escape this life, this plantation, and be together free? Elijah's jaw tightened. He had imagined it, dared to dream it in the quietest corners of his mind, yet reality pressed heavily upon him. I think of it, he admitted, every day. But the world outside is cruel, and our lives, they are not our own. She leaned against him, a silent plea for safety and connection. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, careful yet protective, feeling the tremor of her body through the thin fabric of her dress. The storm's fury mirrored their inner turmoil, each thunderclap a drumbeat to their heartbeat, each flash of lightning a stark illumination of their precarious position. Promise me, he said, voice tight, that you will not come here alone again. The risks, they are too great for both of us. I promise, she whispered, though her eyes conveyed the opposite. But promise me you will not deny me either. Not now, not ever. The rain fell harder, soaking them through, yet neither moved. They were bound together, a fragile cocoon against the storm, against the rules, against the cruel structure of the plantation. The night seemed eternal, a suspended moment where desire and fear coexisted, where they could touch, breathe, and feel without consequence, at least for now. Their lips brushed briefly, tentative, testing the boundary of propriety, of danger, of forbidden longing. It was a kiss that spoke of yearning, of quiet rebellion, of a connection that neither could deny. Lightning flashed again, and they broke apart, breathless, hearts pounding, the reality of their peril pressing down like the storm itself. Elijah, Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. I cannot stay away. I must see you again. Soon. He nodded, torn between longing and caution. I will see you. But we must be careful. The world will not forgive this. She pressed her forehead to his chest briefly, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I do not care, she murmured, voice trembling. I cannot care. I only know that I need you. Only you. They parted then, stepping back into their separate roles, the storm around them a fading echo of the intensity shared beneath the willow. Yet the bond they had forged, the forbidden intimacy, remained, stretching across the distance of the plantation, a tether of desire and fear that neither could sever. In the days that followed, their meetings became more daring. Candlelit encounters in the housey deserted hallways, whispered conversations beneath oaks at twilight, fleeting touches under the cover of darkness. Each stolen moment intensified their connection, deepened the dangerous intimacy, and increased the risk. They began to speak of dreams, of freedom, of a life beyond the plantation's confines. And yet, with every shared secret, the thread of discovery loomed larger. The overseer had begun to watch more closely. Rumors among the other slaves hinted at suspicions, and Eleanor's maid, curious and perceptive, lingered in the corners of rooms longer than she had before. Every glance over her shoulder, every creak of floorboards, every sudden sound became a potential harbinger of disaster. One evening, as Elijah repaired the barn roof, Eleanor approached with a candle hidden beneath her cloak. The wind had begun to howl, carrying the first chill of approaching winter, and the barn provided a temporary haven from both the storm and the watchful eyes of the household. She slipped inside, shutting the heavy doors behind her, and for a moment, the barn was theirs alone. "You came," Elijah breathed, his voice catching with relief and desire. "I could not stay away," she whispered, eyes glistening in the flickering candlelight. "Every day, every hour, it consumes me." They moved closer, the shadows playing across the rough wood, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the trembling of her lips, the small, desperate gestures that betrayed her vulnerability. Elijah reached for her hand, holding it, feeling the warmth and life that had become an addiction, a necessity, a fragile lifeline. "Promise me," he said, voice low, "that no one will see us, that you will not come alone again." "I promise," she said softly, though the glint in her eyes hinted at rebellion. "But promise me you will not deny me either." The storm outside intensified, rain pelting the roof, wind whistling through cracks in the wood. Inside, they clung to one another, finding warmth, solace, and forbidden connection amid the tempest. Every heartbeat, every whispered word, every fleeting touch was a rebellion, a quiet defiance of the cruel, ordered world that sought to keep them apart. And as the night wore on, they knew that their secret, their love, their dangerous, thrilling connection had become something neither could escape, something that would shape every moment, every decision, every breath they took from that night forward. The nights had grown colder, the early frost brushing the edges of the fields, and with it, the weight of fear pressed heavier upon Elijah and Eleanor. Every meeting now carried a sharper edge of peril. They had become bolder, braver, yet more desperate, as though each stolen moment might be the last. That evening, Elijah waited by the old oak at the edge of the northern fields, where the moonlight barely penetrated the heavy canopy of leaves. The air was thick with dampness, mist curling across the ground in slow, ghostly tendrils. He had worked until twilight, ensuring the overseer was occupied elsewhere, the master away at a distant estate. Every sense was alert, ears straining for the footfalls of others, eyes scanning the shadows, hands poised to protect both himself and Eleanor. The soft rustle of a cloak alerted him before he saw her. Eleanor emerged from the tree line, hood pushed back, hair glistening with dew. The sight of her took his breath away, pale and luminous beneath the moonlight, yet vibrant with a fire that refused to be dimmed by circumstance or danger. "Elijah," she whispered, almost lost beneath the sigh of wind through the branches. "I had to come. I could not endure another day of waiting." He swallowed hard, heart hammering, knowing the risk of her presence, yet unable to resist. "Eleanor, if anyone sees—" "I do not care," she interrupted, stepping closer, her eyes glinting with fierce longing. "Not tonight. Tonight, I must be near you." Their hands met beneath the oak, fingers intertwining with a familiarity that had grown over weeks of secret meetings. The intimacy was terrifying and intoxicating. Elijah could feel the heat of her skin through the thin fabric of her dress, hear the quickened beat of her heart against his palm, and taste the sweetness of her fear and desire mingled together. The storm, always their confederate, began to stir. Clouds rolled in, thick and heavy, and a distant rumble of thunder vibrated through the earth. Rain began to fall in a soft, steady patter, drumming against leaves and soil, masking their whispered words from anyone who might be near. "I cannot pretend it does not exist," Eleanor confessed, voice trembling with urgency. Every day, I ache for you. I think of you in the house, in the halls, in the quiet moments when I am alone. It consumes me. Elijah's jaw tightened. And it consumes me, Eleanor. Every day, every hour. I try to work, to focus, to survive, but all I can think of is you. Lightning split the sky, stark and bright, illuminating her face, the curve of her lips, the tremor in her hands. He reached for her, fingers brushing her cheek, and she leaned into the touch, a shiver running through her. The danger, the fear, the risk, all of it was eclipsed by the magnetic pull between them, a force neither could deny. They moved closer beneath the oak, careful yet unrestrained, voices reduced to urgent whispers. A single touch of hands, a fleeting brush of lips, and the world outside ceased to exist. It was only them, the storm, and the dangerous, forbidden fire that had taken root between them. I have been thinking, Eleanor murmured, voice almost lost beneath the rain, of leaving, of escaping, together, if it were possible. Elijah's breath caught. He had dared to imagine it, but her words made the possibility real and yet perilous. I have thought of it too, he admitted. Every night, in the quiet moments, I dream of it. But the world outside, it is cruel. The risk is immense. If we were caught. I know, she interrupted, pressing her hand against his chest. I know, but I cannot live like this forever. I cannot endure the waiting, the longing, the risk of never being close to you. The storm intensified, sheets of rain falling in the gaps between the branches, drenching them both. Yet neither moved to escape. They were bound together by something far stronger than fear, a fragile, luminous connection forged in secret glances, candlelit whispers, and stolen touches. Elijah's hands found hers fully, holding them, feeling the pulse of her veins beneath his fingers. We must be careful, he whispered, voice rough with emotion. Every meeting, every touch. It is a gamble. And one day, the gamble may cost us everything. I know, she murmured, eyes glistening in the flickering moonlight. But even knowing that, I cannot stop. I cannot turn away from you. Their lips met then, tentative, exploratory, a kiss that was both promise and defiance, delicate yet charged with everything they had restrained for weeks. The rain pelted them, masking the sounds of the night, and for a fleeting moment, Elijah allowed himself to forget the world entirely. Thunder cracked, startling them apart, and Elijah caught her, pressing her close. We cannot be careless, he whispered, voice tight with urgency. Someone could see. Someone could hear. We cannot risk everything for a single night. Eleanor nodded, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I know, but I had to be with you. I had to feel this, to know it is real. They moved to the edge of the trees, rain soaking through their clothes, hair plastered to their faces. Every glance, every whispered word, every brush of skin was a rebellion against the rigid, cruel structure of their world. They spoke in hushed tones of freedom, of dreams, of lives beyond the plantation, but always careful, always aware of the danger that surrounded them. A sudden sound, a snapping branch, too loud and too close, made them freeze. Elijah's body stiffened, instincts honed by years of labor and vigilance kicking in. He pressed Eleanor behind him, scanning the shadows, ears straining. The world outside their bubble of intimacy was always threatening, always ready to intrude. Go, he whispered, holding her hand tightly. Go back to the house. Now! She hesitated, lingering, unwilling to leave the warmth and safety of their connection. But she finally nodded, stepping back into the shadows, her cloak clinging to her drenched form. I will return, she whispered, voice low but firm. Soon. We cannot let them win. Elijah watched her disappear into the mist, heart heavy and aching, knowing that each meeting now carried them closer to both revelation and ruin. The storm had passed, leaving the fields wet and glistening, the moonlight reflecting off puddles, and the silence of night pressing in like a reminder of the fragile nature of their secret. That night, alone in his cabin, Elijah could not sleep. He traced the contours of Eleanor's face in his mind, remembered the heat of her hand in his, the trembling of her lips, the depth of longing in her eyes. Every memory was a knife and a comfort, a reminder of what he had risked and what he had gained, however fleeting. And somewhere in the grand house, Eleanor too lay awake, imagining his face, his voice, the feel of his body near hers. Each night, the longing grew stronger, the danger more acute, the bond between them deeper, unbreakable despite the world's cruel constraints. The wind had shifted, carrying a chill that spoke of the coming winter, and with it, the tension that had been building for weeks became unbearable. Elijah moved through the fields under a pale, waning moon, every sound amplified in the stillness. The overseer's lantern glowed faintly in the distance, shadows stretching across the wet ground. He had promised himself to be cautious, yet his thoughts were consumed entirely by Eleanor, by the stolen moments beneath oaks and willows, the warmth of her hand, the taste of her lips in the rain-soaked night. Eleanor waited at the edge of the northern fields, near the familiar oak where their first storm-lit meeting had taken place. She wore a cloak over her dress, but it did little to shield her from the chill, and her hands were pale and trembling as she held a small bundle, a few meager belongings she intended to take with her. The hope of freedom, of escape, burned in her chest, mingled with fear and the ache of leaving behind everything she knew. "Elijah," she whispered as he approached, voice tight with urgency. "I cannot endure it any longer. We must go. Tonight." He looked at her, eyes wide with both longing and apprehension. "Are you certain?" he asked, voice low. "Once we leave, there is no turning back. If we are caught—" "I am certain," she said, stepping closer. "I would rather risk everything than spend another day in this prison of a life. Come with me. Please. We can make it." Elijah's heart surged. He had dreamed of this, imagined it in countless stolen moments, yet now the possibility was real, dangerous, terrifying. He nodded, finally allowing hope to outweigh caution. "We will go," he said. "We must be swift and careful. The overseer, the guards, anyone could see us. Every step is a risk." The storm had begun again, clouds heavy and threatening. But this time they were allies. Rain pelted the earth, masking their footsteps and filling the night with its steady rhythm. They moved together, silent and urgent, their hands clasped tightly, hearts beating in a rhythm that matched the storm itself. As they approached the plantation's edge, a lantern swung into view, and the overseer's voice called out sharply, "Who's out there?" Eleanor froze, terror and determination battling in her eyes. Elijah pulled her into the shadows, crouching low, pressing her against the rough bark of a tree. They held their breath as the overseer's lantern passed mere feet from them, the light glancing across the wet leaves without revealing their hiding place. After what felt like an eternity, the lantern moved away, and they exhaled quietly, pressing onward. The world beyond the plantation beckoned, a dark expanse of forest and open fields. Freedom whispered through the rustling trees, but danger pressed close behind them. "Elijah," Eleanor whispered, Do you think we can make it?" He held her close, brushing rain-soaked hair from her face, feeling her shiver. "We will," he said firmly. "I will not let anyone harm you. We will find a way." The first leg of their journey was slow and careful, weaving through fields and low forest, shadows hiding their movements. Every sound, the crack of a branch, the splash of their feet in puddles, the distant bark of a dog, was a potential threat. Yet every step brought them closer, closer to freedom, closer to a life where they could be together without fear. Hours passed. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them, but the promise of escape lent strength to weary limbs. At last, they reached the edge of a river, swollen with recent rains. Elijah scanned the far bank, estimating the distance in currents. "We can cross here," he whispered. "It's shallow enough, and the current is not too strong. Stay close to me." Eleanor nodded, trembling, but trust radiated from her gaze. They waded into the cold, muddy water, the current tugging at their legs, the darkness amplifying both fear and exhilaration. Each step was a risk. A misstep could doom them both. Yet as they reached the other side, soaked and shivering, a sense of triumph mingled with terror. For a fleeting moment, freedom felt within reach. And then came the shout. Elijah! Stop! The voice was unmistakable. The overseer had discovered their absence and was pursuing them, lanterns swinging wildly. Panic surged, and they ran, sprinting through the mud and darkness, hearts hammering, lungs burning, but always hand in hand, bound by a love that demanded courage beyond measure. Branches whipped at their faces, roots threatened to trip them, but they pressed onward, desperation lending speed and determination. Behind them, the shouts grew louder, closer. The plantation, everything they had known, everything they had left behind, loomed in the darkness, a cruel reminder of what they were risking. Finally, they reached a small clearing, a patch of moonlit ground that promised temporary reprieve. They collapsed beneath the shelter of an overhanging tree, gasping for breath, soaked and trembling. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the danger, the fear, and the exhaustion melted into an overwhelming intensity of relief and triumph. We made it, Eleanor whispered, voice trembling with tears and laughter alike. Elijah brushed rain and sweat from her face, holding her close. Not yet, he said softly. We are not safe until we are far from here, beyond the reach of the plantation, beyond the eyes that would destroy us. But we are together. That is everything. They huddled beneath the tree, planning the next stage of their escape. The world beyond the plantation was uncertain. Freedom in the north was fraught with peril, rivers and patrols, bounty hunters and laws, but it was a hope worth risking everything for. Each whispered strategy, each careful pause to listen for sounds of pursuit, heightened the tension and deepened their bond. Hours passed, the rain slowing to a drizzle, clouds beginning to break. They moved again, cautiously, sticking to the shadows, listening for pursuit. The moon rose higher, illuminating the path ahead, promising both freedom and danger in equal measure. And then, another shout, closer this time, accompanied by the pounding of boots. The overseer had tracked them down. Fear surged, raw and paralyzing, but they pressed on. Every step was a gamble, every misstep a potential disaster, yet the pull of freedom, of love, of life together, propelled them forward. They reached the river again, deeper and swifter here. Elijah grasped Eleanor's hand tightly, wading into the water, feeling the current threaten to drag them apart. Hold on, he urged. Do not let go. The river fought them, icy and relentless, but they pressed through, each step a defiance of the life they had known. Behind them, shouts and splashes told of pursuit, of the plantation's cruel reach, but they would not yield. They could not. At last, exhausted, waterlogged, and trembling, they reached the far bank. Mud clung to their legs, and their bodies shook from cold and adrenaline. Yet for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. They had crossed a line, moved beyond the immediate grasp of their oppressors, and the possibility of freedom glimmered like the first light of dawn on the horizon. They collapsed on the bank, holding each other tightly, gasping, trembling, alive. Their lips met in a desperate, passionate kiss, a culmination of weeks of longing, fear, and stolen moments. The world beyond the plantation was uncertain, dangerous, but for the first time, they could imagine a life together where love, not fear, ruled their days. And yet, even in this fleeting triumph, the shadow of reality lingered. They were fugitives, bound by danger and uncertainty. Every glance over the shoulder, every distant sound of pursuit, reminded them that freedom was never guaranteed. Their love was their strength, their courage, and their greatest risk. Elijah pressed his forehead to hers, whispering, "No matter what comes next, we have this. We have each other." Eleanor clung to him, tears mixing with rain and sweat, whispering, "And that is enough for now." The first light of dawn touched the horizon, painting the world in muted golds and silvers. They rose, weary yet resolute, hand in hand, stepping into the unknown, each heartbeat a testament to their courage, their love, and the forbidden bond that had carried them beyond the shadows of oppression. Though the path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril, and filled with unknown trials, they had chosen each other, and that choice, fragile and defiant, would guide them through whatever lay beyond the plantation gates. And as the morning mist lifted, revealing the vast expanse of fields and forests beyond, Elijah and Eleanor walked forward together, hearts entwined, souls bound by love, and minds braced for the uncertain freedom that awaited them, knowing that every stolen moment, every risk, every act of defiance had led them here, to the precipice of a new life, daring and unclaimed.